Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Appalachian grin, adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Yeah, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Yeah, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.
Boom!
Howdy, folks. Your host, Double J, back here, coming at you live from my studio/RV dining room, located directly inside America. Welcome back, folks of the interwebs. Oh, thank you, Donna, for hitting the smash the like button. Thank you. Welcome back, folks of the interwebs. Once again, your host of Operation GCD here, JJ Vance, and perhaps more notably, not the vice president. Anyhow, I will be your pilot and navigator for tonight's shenanigan-infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. And folks of the interwebs, I'm not going to lie to you, got a real barn burner here on deck for y'all tonight. The Anatomy of Satanic Panic, Volume 6. So we're going to continue on this series. For folks of the interwebs just now joining us here tonight for this series for the first time, welcome. We are going to be building upon each series, so you may want to check out the previous episodes to get a better understanding. But what we've been doing thus far is unpacking that psychological operation that's been run on America, and I suppose the Western world at large, quite honestly, as we've heard from numerous of the Satanic Panic propaganda. Mind more, right? Courtesy of folks like operating under the pretenses of folks such as Michael Aquino, right? Oh, that's the wrong one. I apologize. Old Muppet Mikey there. So we've unpacked his statements of the psyops to mind war, how he operates under that. We've looked at some of his operations in the Phoenix program and the understanding that he set up a bunch of cells, right? Traveled around Southeast Asia, setting up all these Phoenix program cells for folks like Bill Colby, his boss, right? And we see these patterns persist, right? With these matters around the associations of this fella, right? With these matters of spooky operations or matters of quote unquote national security, right? And we introduced one of the folks we focused on last week was old Ted Gunderson, right? So Ted and old Colonel Aquino here showed up on the Geraldo show in the primetime episode to convince America, look, we're looking into the Satanic Panic stuff, but when I think part of that magic show is you do this big primetime performance on one of the three channels on TV at the time, and then you don't look into it any further, because one of the core tenets of Aquino's psyops to mind war that we covered was the basically bombardment with a message, right? There is no evidence, as Michael Aquino says. There are no Satanists, right? He was a big Star Wars fan, so I like to joke around and say he thought he was some sort of Jedi, perhaps. He's like, these are not the Satanists you're looking for, right? So we see that, repeating the same message. There is no Satanist. There is no satanic murders. There is no satanic ritual abuse. We see him profess in his psyops to mind war paper that they're going to do that through every mechanism and measure of media, right? And it's funny, as I've said in previous shows here on the series, these Satanist propagandists tend to make my point. We'll get into that in a minute, but we're going to explore more of the application of his psyops to mind war. We went through a podcast, a highly produced podcast. Went through a documentary in recent years. Those have both come out in the last 2 years, repeating the same statements as we analyzed from Michael Aquino in his written communications, in his Geraldo performance, and also in his own statements from a podcast, right? So we're going to be comparing and contrasting more of those tonight, diving in further and looking at how they're spinning that propaganda even further. But it is part of that psyops to mind war aspect that I think is, relative to understanding what's really going on here, right? Because we see all the Satanist propagandists start spinning all of them, that podcast and that documentary. They're all saying, well, QAnon and Pizzagate are the new Satanic Panic, right? So we're going to be diving into that a little bit further. But would you believe, folks of the interwebs, would you believe that it is Michael Aquino's boss in that psyops to mind war, a General Paul Lavallee, which was front and center on the QAnon Pizzagate stuff, pushing it, right? So we see the propagandists pointing, Pizzagate, right? There is no basement. That's what they want to say. Just like they say there is no tunnels. The new telemarketer call script, right? Michelle remembers. Landing report. McMartin. Oh, you believe they have tunnels? And then we go on to Pizzagate. Oh, you believe that they had a basement? The narrative gets twisted. They continue to lie about these aspects. I have examples from each of those propagandists, the filmmakers, the podcast host, and also comparing those aspects with the QAnon Pizzagate that they're reciting as part of the new Satanic Panic. We're going to compare some of that to the folks that carried on Ted Gunderson's activities, if you will, right? They walked in the path that old Uncle Ted. Y'all remember Uncle Ted, right? We met him in great detail last week. We'll look at some more of his activities tonight. We basically looked at how he globs on to all the Satanic Panic stuff as soon as he retires as the head of COINTELPRO for the FBI in '79, right? We saw the first few cases he jumped on, the McDonald case, the McMartin preschool case, which the single mother of the victim in that case that he infiltrated had nothing nice to say about him. We went over her interview from 2005, Jackie McGauley. She states she's the one who hires the archaeological team that we hear so much about from folks of the propagandist variety, like Lucien Greaves, head of the Satanic Temple. We'll hear from more of him tonight because he also wants to spend the Pizzagate and QAnon stuff, right? But my point being there is we see the same narratives being applied, the same orchestration of psyops to mind, literally by Paul Valet being involved in it, Aquino's boss in that. And we see the same kind of tropes being carried out as far as we saw Lucien Greaves last week dissecting the joke that is Ted Gunderson. And there's a lot of things to be said about that, right? That he was serving that role in which to discredit these things, as was rightfully pointed out last week, right? Old Ted there, he never seemed to lose credibility, right? No matter what he brought to the table, no matter how many times, right? Never seemed to lose credibility, right? And I think that's even a Nazi Satanist clock is right twice a day. And I think that's a relevant point to understand here is the role that Ted served. And then we have folks that did the same thing, in the early aughts into the 2010s when Ted was no longer with us, with this world, if you will, because, one of the prevailing narratives of the interwebs is old Ted there, Ted Gunderson. He got murdered for all the things he said. He's out there getting murked for his national tour of these activities. We'll get into that some more because the folks that are perpetrating that it's literally a night of Malta. The origin story of Ted getting murked and poisoned is by a doctor who's literally a night of Malta, right? But it is that Ted served that we can continue seeing being served by other parties. And the other party we're going to dissect tonight is Tracy Twyman. And she continues not only the Satanic Panic aspects that Ted was fulfilling, but she then perpetrates the QAnon Pizzagate aspects, playing that role that Ted played, and that they can then point to that as far as, look, these folks are crazy. And we're going to dissect some of the propaganda statements again tonight. Again, it's these folks are either ignorant or deceived. I tend to think that they're not either one of those, and this is all, again, a well-organized propaganda plan because they make statements like, oh, we did all this research, and they always recite the same psyops to mind war aspect. There was no evidence, right? These are not the Satanists you're looking for, right? But we see here in that psyops to mind war paper, well, maybe. There we go. So Colonel Paul E. Valet. So he very much was involved in the QAnon stuff, right? So that was the man who was in charge of all the psyops for the Army there, Aquino's boss. And we see him all over the QAnon situation, perpetrating that, right? So that, that's an interesting aspect, I think. And then, of course, like I said, we're going to go back over some Geraldo stuff because while they're doing that Geraldo thing, the episode we dissected last week, the Devil Worshipper is Exposed episode from 1987, right? We see Geraldo playing kind of that role in the media to make it look ridiculous because not only do they have evidence in that episode, they have law enforcement officers, they have the butcher of Kansas City guy there, right? Berdella. They have the officers involved talking about how it's Satanism. They have an interview with Berdella claiming that, all this is a lie. He's basically psyop to mind warring folks. Meanwhile, it turns out he was a pretty heinous serial killer, right? So we'll go over some more of that clip, but I think that helps fits this. You have to have a stage for these folks to play on, and we saw Aquino and Gunderson on the same stage, right? We saw, we have reports from Jackie McGauley at the same time in 87 where he's infiltrating her life, the McMartin scandal, that, that he's talking to Aquino every day. There's a lot of other questionable activities to go around Ted, but the thing that Ted did after that we looked at last week was the McMartin and the McDonald stuff. Then he gets involved with the Finders situation and the Franklin scandal. There's a running thread of a connecting principle in all of these matters, and Ted's there to kind of shitcoat it seems, right? With his old buddy Geraldo Rivera. And if anyone remembers the sex scandal Rivera had in 2013, he had that weird selfie that he took. Turns out it was with a Muppet. But we see, we're gonna hear from more of Uncle Ted, and we're gonna hear from Lucien Greaves, in that Uncle Ted expose he did, comparing and contrasting some of these ongoing psyops to mind war statements relative to Tracy Twyman specifically. So, there's a lot of things that can be said, but when Tracy Twyman's not right, she's writing all these books about Baphomet, for example, right? Literally the logo of this organization. This fellow, Lucien Greaves, as we saw last week, he's associates with Tracy's former mentor, Boyd Rice. We saw him last week too, the Nazi Satanist. Might have been 2 weeks ago. The Nazi Satanist that was, Nazi Satan and up, right? So, when she's writing books about Baphomet, she's not. This is after this organization's formed. She's not including any of them. She never mentions Boyd Rice, and then we can unpack some of her other statements and activities relative to the ongoing satanic panic and the shoes she seemed to have filled in the wake of Ted Gunderson's passing, right? And of course, we're going to go over, like I said, the Satan Wants You documentary again, some of their statements from that documentary filmmakers. And then again, we started unpacking a lot of this narrative around this propaganda piece. Again, these folks are making the same statements as Aquino. They're following the same playbook as Aquino. And again, each and every conclusion is there are no Satanists. There is no evidence. These people, every time in these propaganda campaigns, produce statements and conclusions that either indicate they are propagandists or they are making a production without any information or effort in which to achieve that, right? And I think the most reasonable solution is, or conclusion is, they are propagandists. So we'll go over some more of that. But relative again to Tracy Twyman, so she writes about satanic ritual abuse and mind control in a Hustler magazine article in 2002, right? She publishes that later in a book she writes around about the same subject in 2008. She doesn't change her viewpoints at all. However, she's the protege of Boyd Rice, the Church of Satan ranking member, Satanist Nazi fellow, and neo-process self-proclaimed. And she doesn't ever make any mentions of these statements, and even in her later writings after she allegedly parts in 2004 with Boyd Rice, right? So it's the, looking at those things, the manner in which she operates, again, in the path of Ted, so to speak, literally citing Ted, claiming Ted found those tunnels in her book. Ted actually publishes that tunnel report, claiming it was him as well. We see videos of Ted doing it. So this is what I mean by she's following in the footsteps of Ted, and the pathway that he torched, because Ted basically globbed onto things, and it seems like he shitcoat those matters so that nothing would ever be resolved. That was the resolutions of Jackie McGauley, the McMartin preschool mother that he infiltrated, right? So, and again, we saw a newspaper article highlighting where Ted went out to that same McMartin preschool days in advance of that archaeological team doing the survey, and took parents with shovels, the McMartin parents. So I think it's reasonable to conclude, just based upon some of that, and we're going to unpack more of those activities and actions of Ted, what he was getting into with the Finders, the Franklin, and then jump that over to how Tracy Twyman carries that torch. Because if she's going to write about satanic ritual abuse, naming Larry Flint in his own magazine published in Hustler in 2002, and then never changed her view. She prints basically the same stuff in 2008, post her relations with Boyd Rice. So you have to kind of you have to kind of take that apart and unpack it in a constructive fashion to kind of look at it and understand, like, well, if she's reciting the same sort of propaganda, right, while she's a a protege of Boyd Rice, this ranking Church of Satan dude and neo-process dude, ardent Nazi, is we can, you know that from his own mouth, right?
No, the alleged Night Stalker worship the devil.
Another associate of Keno's buddy LeVay right there, Richard
that
Ramirez.
exalts sadistic murder, torture, ritualistic suicide, and racial purity.
This has historically been a sacred day, a day of purification, a day of hell and fury. We mourn not its victims, we honor its victors. In closing, I would remind those here.
So we get a heavy dose of some Nazi Satanism there with Tracy Twyman's protege, or I'm sorry, mentor, right? So she's the mentor of, or protege of that dude in 2002 when she writes that Hustler article. She's reprinting that Hustler article in her book in 2008 with slight changes, and again naming Larry Flint in his own publication. All of these seem very dubious and super suspect, right? But nonetheless, I'm fine with somebody leaving and no longer being a Nazi Satanist. We do live in a world where redemption should be available to folks, right? However, if you're writing books about Baphomet, when you have the Satanic Temple of Lucien Greaves as their number one logo, that's their logo, is the Baphomet, and you're not even mentioning them in your book, and Lucien Greaves just happens to be friends and part of the neo-process movement with your former protege or mentor Boyd Rice, well, these things seem very dubious, right? And again, she walks in the steps of Ted Gunderson, thanking him the entire way, improperly citing things he never did. So these are the things that I think are very pertinent. And again, she also carries the torch with the QAnon and Pizzagate stuff, right? QAnon and Pizzagate stuff. So, Burdell is a connected dude, right? Yeah, I mean, he had a lot of connections, and all these folks have weird connections, right? We're going to be getting into more of those weird connections next week on 6 Degrees of Muppet Michael Aquino, because his buddy Anton LaVey, who's often written off as a carnival barker of sorts, this dude's connected to the mob, the early Church of Satan members, not the least of which was Aquino by his own admission. He claims to have joined in 1969, but then later makes a statement in that podcast we heard him say where he's like, oh, well, I've been there for 10 years. Well, if you've been there for 10 years, buddy, in 1975, that's the entire existence of the Church of Satan at that point. So on top of that, we see members of European royalty, but LaVey's embedded with the mob, international gun trafficking, but he also seems to have a proclivity for meeting with serial killers. We covered one this past Sundays on my Edward Wayne Edwards case study, right? For those folks of the interwebs here on the join me for the Operation GCD Patreon combo there, you've got that, and tonight's as well. But Thomas Creech is not the only serial killer that has met Anton LaVey personally met him preceding, again, Richard Ramirez, a lot of other satanic stuff, but we'll be getting to some more of that next week, right? With matters such as 6 Degrees of Michael Aquino, right? To understand the environment and characters. We're going to be discussing that a little bit tonight, because Michael Aquino, like I said, worked for Bill Colby, CIA director, Operation Gladio, Air America drug trafficking, Phoenix program. He's responsible for those programs. Aquino worked for him in the Phoenix program. We hear Aquino describe those activities. We see Ted Gunderson then associating himself with all these other folks of Colby's variety. I call them Colby's queers. Not a commentary on their sexual proclivity, but more or less a commentary on the odd and strange nature of the impact these folks have had on our society and how we still can't figure these things out, right? So Franklin scandal, you got John DeCamp there with that. He's a Colby queer, right? And you got Ted moving in to help shitcoat that thing later. The same goes for the Finders. Marion Petty, the head of the Finders, the child trafficking cult that gets shut down for matters of national security, right? We have that report here to go over a little bit tonight on that matter. But the leader of that cult, his son, I've now been able to confirm, was Air America, right? He was a Colby queer in Vietnam, flying in allegedly drugs along with folks like his fellow associate, Barry Seal. Folks are very common with that name. Folks don't know George Petty as well, but they were of the same associations there under this Colby program, if you will. These Operation Gladio, Phoenix program, serial killers, drug trafficking of Air America, brought back to the U.S. courtesy of Bill Colby and his queers. And it's Ted. He's all around those matters, right? He's helping out with seemingly making sure that nothing ever gets accomplished in those varieties. And it's interesting because there's witnesses in the Franklin scandal that testify that, once again, the witness statements come up Aquino, right? They come up Aquino. So if he's coming up Aquino in them daycare scandals, he's coming up Aquino in all these other child satanic ritual abuse scandals, you have to ask, are these products of that same sort of cell network that Aquino was famous and made his bones of, in Viet fucking Nam there working for the Phoenix program? And I would say, yeah, I think that's an accurate assessment. So we're going to be unpacking a lot of these ideas here again tonight, folks. And again, I like to use the words of these Nazi Satanists themselves, not my words, and we can see them all from the podcast in 2023. Disregard the Satan Wants You documentary film in 2023, to the podcast The Devil Within You in 2024, to Lucien Greaves in 2019 and his little expose of Ted. Every one of these propagandists, Aquino wasn't, I don't have any record of him pointing to the Pizzagate and the QAnon, but there's a couple interviews he did before his death that we'll unpack in the future where I'm sure he's going to reach those same conclusions, because these are the psyops to mind more, right? These aren't the Satanists you're looking for, right? There are no, again, every one of these folks, Aquino, the propagandists of the documentary, the podcast, Lucien Greaves, they all repeat the same statements, right? There is no evidence. And again, the Geraldo show, I think, was part of that magic show because they had evidence in there, right? They had the law enforcement officers, in fact, and the actual serial killer they interview, as seen in that program, right?
Been fueled by police and media reports, implying that Verdella played demonic music, owned a ritual throne and fetish objects, and made animal sacrifices. Using police reports and photos, Verdella disputed every such allegation.
This is Detective Sergeant Lee Orr from the Kansas City,
Kansas.
Kansas.
There's the Geraldo show. We see the
video piece. This is retired Detective Michael.
We see them compare to the actual investigation to the statements, because again, the serial killer, of course, is going to tell you.
City Star is reporting
there are no Satanists. He's not going to admit to claiming that he's killed anybody for any kind of devil worship or anything else like that, ritualistic, etc. So, one of the other characters we see Ted glob onto, as well as in the Colby Queers community, is a fellow by the name of Chip Tatum. Going to unpack that in a later case study of Ted we're gonna do in the future here on Operations GCD Thursdays. But I thank you all for joining me here tonight to get a little GCD. But Chip Tatum was allegedly another member of this outfit of Colby Queers, right? And he comes up with a lot of stories around the OKC stuff, again, which revolves more of Colby's Queers. Bo Gritz was an undercover agent for the FBI in the PatCon documents. Timothy McVeigh might have been the other undercover agent for the FBI in there. It's listed as a former Special Forces guy and a retired Special Forces guy, right? As these undercover agents in the FBI PatCon. Well, we know that Bo Gritz was that retired undercover agent, right? So once again, Bo Gritz, Colby's Queers, Phoenix program, right? John DeCamp, Franklin Scandal, Phoenix program. Marion Petty's son, George Petty, Air America, right? Barry Seal, drug trafficking, right? These things are all part of an apparatus that all seem to go back to Bill Colby and his Queers, and like Michael Aquino and gang, and it all seems to go back to that's the operational side. Then the propaganda side, they all seem to recite the same telemarketing script, right? They've advanced it onto QAnon and Pizzagate, right? Past the Michelle Remember. They still got to tie it back to Michelle Remembers. Again, that was that sort of controlled opposition of that psychiatrist and his wife / sex slave or whatever. The folks that Ira Reiner, Charles Manson's buddy, who was the district attorney who dropped the charges on McMartin in Los Angeles County, he hired Michelle Remembers folks as his experts in the case, right? Again, the DA, the Los Angeles district attorney who brought those charges and did a press conference stating that whole scandal was focused around child porn. Well, he got out of office about a month later, and Ira Reiner made sure that nothing got handled. And then we got Ted, coming on the back end with those parents with shovels. And then he'll later take claim, as we saw, of being the person that hired the archaeological team. So this is what he does. He globs on, he shitcoats it, and we see him doing it across all these spectrum of activities, including matters relative to Bill Colby's Queers, right? And again, we see the evolution of that into a character such as Tracy Twyman. Again, Tracy Twyman, who I'm fine with no longer being a Nazi Satanist, but she's writing about these matters while she's a Nazi Satanist, confirmed, admitted, with Boyd Rice, as we saw, as her mentor. She doesn't change that perception or her statements or perspective after her alleged break with Boyd Rice. We see her continuing on associated with neo-process individuals and also ignoring neo-process individuals such as Lucien Greaves, the guy who did the documentary expo we unpacked on TED there. It's an odd environment, but what it seems to indicate is the same things it indicates with TED, right? It's the same pattern of behavior, right? Same activities, same script, same call center script, right? And we see that again with these documentary filmmakers with the QAnon Pizzagate stuff, right?
Repeating the mistakes of the past now, because a lot of people believe QAnon and Pizzagate. People have been actually harmed by these theories.
This is another layer to this film. I mean, what does it mean to be human, and why do we believe in things even when there's no basis or concrete evidence or no basis in reality, right? And this whole thing about storytelling, constructing reality is definitely an element to this story too, and all the different ways storytelling works, right? Like you share information with a story, you educate somebody, but if you don't like somebody, you can also make up a story to ruin their life and their, storytelling is great. It's terrible. It's part of being human.
It truly.
So we see again, it's the same. There is no evidence. These aren't the Satanists you're looking for, right? And again, it's QAnon and Pizzagate are the evolutions of these things. Yeah, I do think there could be an admiration there of the sinister nature of Aquino there. Appreciate the comment, Todd. And I see we got Bill Colby's cleaners sweep up crew here tonight. Good to see you there, RR. And I see you're quick on your Colby work tonight. Good work. I appreciate it. I don't think you're getting very far because the facts say otherwise, but I salute you nonetheless. Good effort. So, there is obviously mind control aspects, just like there was obviously a satanic panic, right? But that's an organized effort in which to convince folks, pay no attention to your senses. There are no Satanists murdering folks. There are no ritual abuse of children, right? In the same regard, these things are, they're done in the same manner, right? Where you have, there are folks like Kathy O'Brien, she may be telling some factual details of these kind of mind control programs. Is she an honest survivor? Is she perpetrating things? Is she a victim herself? It's possible. She may still continue to be victimized, right? Folks like Virginia Giuffre, Jeffrey Epstein's sole victim that everyone knows that we're given this one kind of victim. They throw out Maria Farmer later, but we're kind of given this one victim, and she's, I don't think she ever left the system. She was kind of a victim her whole life, I think it seems. So I do think that's an important thing to consider, that when you're looking at even the folks that Ted globs onto, right? Kathy O'Brien, we'll see in her book, she thanks the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, the CIA psychiatrist, and I don't think she's being sarcastic in doing that either, right? So it is these kind of matters that we can see. Ted's the throughput. He's kind of the national. He's like a salesman. He's doing these national tours with these folks, selling these things. And again, we see folks like Tracy Twyman in the follow up doing the same activities, right? And as we unpack more of these actions and activities tonight, it is important to consider the source of a lot of information. As I said before, Ted's described as being murdered.
The death dumps, otherwise known as chemical trails, are being dropped and sprayed throughout the United States.
And the man who's perpetrating that hoax based upon that footage right there, claiming he was dead, is this fella, a Knight of Malta.
My friends, the late and great Ted Gunderson, former head of the FBI in LA, Dallas, and Memphis, requested of me and of his daughter that an autopsy was made.
So again, we'll look into more of that tonight relative to Ted, his actions and activities and his associations, because he is seen to be a central point of this propaganda network of folks to point at and say, look, they're wrong, right? because you get him associated with folks, not just the Bryce Taylor we met last week or Kathy O'Brien. You also got him associated with folks like John Todd, rapist, occultist who claimed to be some sort of former occultist, right? Convicted rapist guy. Fred Springmeier, Mr. Bloodlines of the Illuminati. Actually, he's a white Nazi or white nationalist connected to that same white nationalist compound in Hayden Lake. He did about 9 years for bank robbery and blowing folks up. And again, that same white nationalist compound in Hayden Lake, Idaho, has deep connections to Colby Squares. So you have, in an Operation Gladio style situations, you have to ask yourself, why is it the origin source of a lot of these tales, looking at who's perpetrating these stories and narratives, why does it come back to dubious sources and questionable narratives, right? Seemingly every time. And again, I don't think that, I know Tracy Twyman's work's got a lot of favor. I've looked over, we're going to unpack that at some point in the future more, but she is following the footsteps of Ted. And again, she's talking about Baphomet, not talking about Lucy and the Satanic Temple neo-process Baphomet, because that's too connected to her former mentor, the Nazi Satanist Boyd Rice. But we see this the same thing in regards to these sources, because while we unpacked the Lucy and Greaves Ted expose, right, Uncle Ted's expose there, we also have to understand he's a Nazi Satanist, and he's obviously got an agenda, it seems, right, to not purport the truths or facts, but simply conduct some psyops to mind more. He's actually specialized in false memory syndrome and connected to the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, and writes about that on his blog, process.org. So that is something to consider, and it's also something to consider when we see him doing some blatant propaganda in regards to these matters.
And I also asked him what he thought about the process. Several of the luminaries from the process went off to open the largest no-kill animal shelter in the world, and they were stridently anti-vivisection and pro-animal rights. And he said in regards to them opening the animal shelter that this is because they need the animals to commit their ritual sacrifices. And I asked him what direct evidence.
Oh, that was the wrong clip. I apologize. This was the right clip on the process.
You're wrong. I first became aware of Ted Gunderson, I think it was about 2004, and I was researching this old defunct cult from the 60s known as...
Nope, that was it. So that's the old defunct cult in the 60s. There's Lucy again with that propaganda. Demonstrably, not only do they not defunct in the 60s, they're not defunct today. They're not defunct today at all. So they just kept changing the name on the sign, same corporate documents from the Process Church onto the Best Friends Animal Society. But, there's old Lucian toting that propaganda line. So it is important to consider source here as well, but when we're dissecting some of these statements. But at the end of the day, this interview we unpacked before from The Devil Within. I'm sorry, not from The Devil Within, from a show called The Michael Decon Show with an interview with Michael Aquino. He's going to psyops the mind more till he dies, right? This is right before he dies, actually, and he still psyops the mind more, folks, right? That was his goal, that was his intent, and he stated so in a paper with Paul Valle, the QAnon guy, right? General Valle. And if you apply the statements he makes in regards to satanic abuse, satanic ritual, sacrifices, etc., and you apply his psyops to mind more, he's clearly psyops to mind more, folks. Again, he wants to keep repeating the same thing and try to say, well, that's been debunked. There are no tunnels, or that's been debunked. There is no basement in Comet Pizza. And we'll get into an interview that James Alefantis, the guy that was, the narrative was twisted, that all of his Pizzagate stuff went around his restaurant. Well, we'll get into that where he does an interview where he admits they have a basement. So these statements, again, it's the psyops to mind more, and that is their intent.
God, you can't get any scarier than that.
Yes.
So then all kinds of people came out of the woodworks. Well, my kid was sort of, sexually abused by him too. So was mine. He was up there at the Bohemian Grove, leading the Archbishop of Los Angeles and various state senators and things in.
So he's just, again, he'll keep telling you you're wrong, and this is why. And again, he did it also in that same interview, if you folks remember, when the podcast host, I think, genuinely just wanted his opinion on LSD, John Lilly, and how John Lilly, the scientist processing, by the way, gave LSD to a dolphin. And Michael Aquino was butthurt at that suggestion. He's like, that never happened. And that's again another example of how he wants the psyops to mind more, folks, state what he knows is demonstrably false. But if he repeats it and does it repeatedly through every mechanism of technology, as he stated in his paper with General Valle, well, that is the psyops to mind more.
I'm glad you mentioned John Lilly. What were your thoughts and opinions on the whole LSD experiments with dolphins?
Well, I don't remember that he tried LSD with dolphins. I know that he was interested in research concerning dolphin intelligence.
Right.
Because they are known to be the next smartest animal on the planet next to ourselves, and possibly more so. You don't know because they don't talk to us a whole lot. But he was obviously interested in the notion of animal intelligence, animal consciousness, and dolphins were obviously the best prospect to research this. I suppose he could have gone after other primates like chimpanzees and things, but he chose dolphins. That was a rather interesting choice.
There you go. Science to mind more, folks. You can even go on and watch a video recording of the experiment. So, yeah, and I just want to point out, I'm not trying to diminish anyone's character, talk ill of the dead, the alleged dead, that is. However, I'm just pointing out, calls them how's the season, folks. Pointing out that the activities and actions of these folks, yes, that would be correct. Springmeier's real name, Victor Earl Shook, I think, and that's the incorrect spelling. But again, and now I get it. We'll go over the letter from Boyd Rice tonight, where he separates from Tracy Twyman officially, as he claims, in 2004. Right, in 2004, Aquino and LaVey would do the same thing. They'd be like, "Oh, we stopped being BFFs in 1975." Well, numerous incidents and evidence would exist in the years after 1975 to make that statement seem very dubious, if not an outright falsehood. So I'm not saying that's the same with Tracy Twyman and Boyd Rice. What I'm saying is after 2004, Boyd Rice separates from her. Right, she's already done the Hustler article on the mind control and satanic ritual abuse stuff, naming Larry Flint in his own publication, which is weird. And she preprints that relative to the other known knowns, right? We got some known knowns in regards to all of this tomfoolery, these psyops to mind war, the anatomy of the satanic panic, and we got some unknown unknowns. And then, of course, there's some, we got some known unknowns and then some unknown unknowns, because if they were known, they wouldn't be unknown. And, the Donald Rumsfeld philosophy, if you will.
As we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't.
There you go. And there's a lot of that around Tracy Twyman. So, but I'm trying to unpack the known knowns, right? And we'll go over some of the known unknowns. But what I'm saying is you can write about satanic abuse of the past. You don't talk about your former associates. You write Baphomet books, but folks like Lucien Greaves there, Satanic Temple, Mr. Process, she doesn't write about his Baphomet stuff, right? Again, I would question even the statement she writes about these things, but nonetheless, on its face, that seems very dubious. It seems very Ted-like. She makes a lot of claims, like Lucien was saying about Ted never losing credibility. She makes a lot of claims over the years in that same capacity, never losing credibility. I don't think she got shot by lasers.
There's thousands of Americans out there. By the way, I've been shot with a laser beam twice.
But I don't know that for a fact. So, but we'll, the last thing here, folks, at the interwebs we're going to go through tonight again is the application of these tactics and tools of Michael Aquino's Psyops to Mind War. The precise same statements, again, were cited relative to QAnon and Pizzagate, Tracy Twyman's wheelhouse, come 2008 or so, 2010. And we'll also see how these Nazi Satanist propagandists make my point for me, right? So as I was saying in the Psyops to Mind War of General Valley and Muppet Mikey there, they talk about using every form of technology. And again, that's what these folks are claiming they're doing. And even in that podcast we were dissecting, The Devil Within.
As mentioned earlier, one of the biggest differences between the Satanic Panic and the QAnon movement has to do with technology. The Satanic Panic occurred before the information age, so it took longer to grow roots and really spread its message. But when it did finally reach a potential convert, it would then seem organic and, I guess, more true. Otherwise, how could it have managed to build such a powerful following?
And that's kind of the point of Michael Aquino's thing, right? He wants to deceive the folks in the Psyops to Mind War to make it seem like it's a grassroots and not some sort of AstroTurf campaign of propaganda. right? And again, that is one of his propagandists who we've seen make the same statements. We'll see him doing it again tonight. Michelle remembers. Landing report. McMartin, you believe they have tunnels? You're a moron. Of course, Ted would glob on his name to all those tunnels. He actually printed the actual tunnel report, put it on his website, and put his name at the top of it. So we'll look at some of that too. Again, if Tracy Twyman can't discern these things from fact from fiction, I don't think that's accurate. I think she could. I do think she could. When she's giving Ted credit for the tunnels, I don't think that's by accident in doing so at all. But once again, these are the matters we're going to be getting into tonight, folks. So I thank you again for joining me here to get a little GCD and catch us. Come on over to patreon.com/Operation GCD for the remainder of tonight's program. And if you catch this broadcast in the future, folks, yeah, again, this isn't a program to badmouth Tracy Twyman. I'm simply unpacking the same salient characteristics that we have of anyone else in regards to these matters. She is the one who was talking about these things and associated with Nazi Satanists. Nazi Satanists she would never talk about, but yet she'd write books about Baphomet, but not Lucian's Baphomet, despite writing 2 books after the creation of that situation. Again, these are neo-process figures, and by the statements of the own radio show of Clyde Lewis, where she was a producer, he would say that she booked folks like Al Jorgensen on his show, lead singer of Ministry, producer of that process band Skinny Puppy, friends with Genesis P-Orridge, neo-process stuff like Boyd Rice. So if you're not going to talk about it, you're going to leave it, and you're going to talk about those subjects surrounding it in a shit code capacity, Ted Gunderson style, I got a lot of questions, and I don't think you're being honest about any of them. Again, she wrote an article in Hustler in 2002, while friends with Boyd Rice, about satanic ritual abuse, naming Larry Flint in his own publication. Larry Flint, the guy who's steeped in process activity, not the least of which, that hitman, Mr. Manson 2 from Ultimate Evil, Bill Metzer, was the security guard for Larry Flint. Not the least of which, right? Not the least of which. So, dark stuff nonetheless. Again, I'm not trying to point fingers at Tracy Twyman no more than I am at Uncle Ted, just asking questions as far as their activities go, unpacking these things and pointing out these are the same activities. And we see Michael Aquino's boss pushing the QAnon and Pizzagate stuff. Well, would you folks believe that Tracy Twyman started her own QAnon? So she's literally taking almost like an offshoot of the operation on top of the shit code, and she's even starting her own franchise, it seems. And we'll dig into that some more here too, right? We'll dig into that some more here too. So on that note, folks, Ministry. Yeah, again, I'm not making statements. These folks, as we saw from Boyd Rice, self-proclaimed Nazi Satanists. I mean, I'm not trying to make any jumps saying, oh, they're part. Like, I would like to say Ted's a cultist, right? We'll explore some of that. There's a lot of information that seems to suggest that old Ted Gunderson may have shacked up with Anton LaVey's first ex-wife, right? The founder of the Church of Satan. She turned out to be a private investigator and handwriting expert. Well, some of those rumors, well, I haven't formally put them in the same spot, but it's getting a lot closer considering her professions. But we'll get into some of that, some of those rumors. Like I said, I'm trying to make that jump and say Ted was a cultist, but what I'm saying is, there's a lot more going on here. You know what I mean? And if he's associated with LaVey's ex-wife, well, that's a different story altogether, right? But nonetheless, I thank you folks again for joining me here tonight to get a little GCD. Catch us in the broadcast in the future. Pop on over to Patreon. And if not, those Patreon folks, I'll see you over there momentarily. Possibly. I think I had one more thing. Got a couple shows coming up. I got Fridays tomorrow. Fridays with Julia, Cosmic Peach. We're going to be doing some serial killers of game shows from the 1970s. And Sundays, got Operation GCD Sundays coming up. We're going to do some occult genealogy of America, kind of a 6 degrees situation, but with the victims and victimology of some of these major occult crimes, right? From the Mansons to the Zodiacs, etc., right? And next Wednesdays, Operation GCD Live, do another film, an occult and or esoteric film review of the film Sneakers. So that's going to be a good one. And of course, next Thursdays, folks of the interwebs, 6 degrees of Michael Aquino. We're going to get into more of those LaVey connections, all the serial killers, the royalties, the grandson of a U.S. president who was an early member of the Church of Satan. etc. Direct connections from the membership of the Church of Satan to the Agape Lodge of the OTO and Scientology. So that's going to be a real barn burner, folks. But thanks again for joining me, and we'll see you over there on Patreon here in a few.
Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Yeah, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Yeah, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.